Good morning. Today is Sunday, October 31st, 2021. I am disappointed in Friday's Supreme Court ruling in favor of Mike Ward, a comedian who had already been convicted by two lower courts for insulting and mocking Jeremy Gabriel, who was born with Treacher-Collins syndrome, which causes visible malformations on his head and his ears. And at the time that this abuse was going on, of Ward making these jokes in his public comedy routine, Jeremy was 13 years old. Ward's jokes included wanting to meet Jeremy and kill him as a joke. The effect of these jokes on Jeremy's life as a 13-year-old, the effects were traumatic. On Friday, he said, "When I first heard the jokes, I tried to end my life." Can you imagine how it felt at 13 years old because a 40-year-old man said you should die? That you thought it was the right thing to do. There was testimony during the various trials that Gabriel grew despondent, contemplated suicide, sought psychiatric help to cope with the ridicule he experienced from other students, which was unrelenting. The court exonerated Ward by asserting his right to free speech outweighed Jeremy's right to live in dignity, a right granted by Canadian law and by the Quebec Charter. It was a split decision, 5-4, and the majority wrote, "When balancing the right to freedom of speech and the right to dignity protected under the Quebec Charter, a two-step test has to be undertaken. The first is to determine whether Ward's remarks were intended to incite others to vilify Gabriel based on his disability. The second test is to determine whether the remarks were likely to lead to discriminatory treatment of Gabriel. In our opinion, the comments made by Mr. Ward meet neither of these two requirements." I just think that conclusion is intuitively wrong. It is clear that he was inciting others to vilify Jeremy. And it is certainly clear that the jokes that he made, the insults that he made, were likely to lead to discriminatory treatment. The B'nai B'rith was an intervener in the case, and they point out a legal matter, and that is the decision highlights a gap in Canadian human rights legislation because the Quebec Charter prohibits discrimination, but not incitement to discrimination. So discrimination means an action of discrimination, but incitement, to say words to urge others to discriminate against someone, that's not covered in the Quebec Charter, and that distinction is what the court relied on in order to find Ward not guilty. And B'nai B'rith is saying that is something that is missing in the law. If we're going to outlaw discrimination, we should outlaw the speech that incites to that discrimination. Now, I understand protecting free speech requires protecting offensive speech. But the fact is, there are already limits to free speech. Listen to the words, please, of the minority opinion. So remember, 5-4, 4 justices wrote the following. we would never tolerate humiliating or dehumanizing conduct towards children with disabilities. There is no principled basis for tolerating words that have the same abusive effect. Wrapping such discriminatory conduct in the protective cloak of speech does not make it any less intolerable when that speech amounts to willful, emotional abuse of a disabled child. And there is no question that this speech led to willful, emotional abuse of a disabled child. The fact that it was in the form of speech should not change the damage caused from if it had been in the form of action. Julius Gray, well-known lawyer here in Montreal, said on yesterday's newspaper, "I think this is a very important victory. It is a victory for liberty across the country." I'm sorry, I should have said. Julius Gray was Mike Ward's lawyer. He was supporting his client. It's a victory for liberty across the country. I don't agree. I think it's a victory for bullying and mistreatment of those who are most vulnerable in our society. Jeremy Gabriel himself said on Friday, "To be honest, I'm actually a little worried for the future, because if a really well-known comedian can say those things about a child and not have to be held responsible for those words, what are we going to say about children? What is the limit of treating children right?" Now, aside from the legal issues, a Torah outlook should be revulsed by Ward's words. If we consider the concept, the value of Lashon Hara, of not speaking negatively about another, if we understand the power of speech, which has the ability to help and to harm just as much as actions, consider V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love another as we love ourselves, to remember that every human being is created b'tselem Elokim and is entitled to dignity from a Torah point of view, and so many other values within Judaism, speak in a completely contrary manner to everything that this comedian is trying to achieve. I realize these values infringe on a comedian's right to make certain jokes. And had the original judgment against Ward been upheld, comedians might have to think before making certain jokes. I think that's a good thing. I prefer a society that protects children with disabilities from verbal abuse over a comedian's right to get laughs. My friends, I want to wish you a good day. Let's all try to remember to speak nicely about other people, even if we are joking. And I look forward to seeing all of you soon in person.